Hello, and welcome to Listen.Up.People, a podcast of the USC Suzanne Dworak-Peck School of Social Work. I'm Dr. Holly Priebe-Sotelo, Associate Teaching Professor of Practicum Education and your host for the second season of this podcast. Today, we're going to cover a timely and important topic during this especially challenging time in our democracy: social work and public policy, and how deeply they intersect. Social workers have the ability to accurately and unapologetically inform policy that often bridge the gaps between community needs, and the government action to build a more just society. I'd also like to add that I recently received my doctorate in public policy planning and development, and I also coordinate all the macro-based practicum internships for our school. So this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. I'm excited to have two special guests who will expand on this topic and its importance during this critical time. So I'm glad to get right into the introduction so we can get this conversation started. I'd like to welcome Sam Mistrano, Associate Teaching Professor and colleague at USC School of Social Work. He's an expert in public policy and policy practice and holds a Juris Doctorate in law. And Dr. Melissa Bird, a USC alumna who is currently a candidate for U.S. Representative in Oregon's 4th Congressional District. Congratulations, and this is very exciting. So great to have you both.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic. So I'd like to get started, if it's okay, to ask something a little personal about you and how you became interested in this policy work, as it gives our listeners a little more insight into your backgrounds. So let's start with Sam, if that's okay, and then we'll go to Melissa.
Hi. Well, after I graduated from law school from the University of Minnesota, my first job was with the American Civil Liberties Union of the national office in DC, where I worked on a lot of policy, of course. And then I transferred over to the ACLU of Southern California to be a legislative director. And after many, many years in LA, the School of Social Work asked if I wanted to part-time teach a policy course. And 23 years later, I'm a full-time associate professor here. And the thing I want to leave with you and with our listeners is that the reason I've stayed so long is that this profession, the profession of professional social workers, is a prime profession that exists to make society better, make families better, communities better, societies better. And there's no other profession I've interacted with that has that kind of mission. And so I'm always very excited. Every semester, I teach some level of policy classes to interact with grad students who are at least open to, if not like Melissa, motivated to become elected and make decisions.
Excellent. Thank you, Sam. I didn't know that about you. And see, now I'm learning something new. Thank you, Sam. Melissa, please.
Yeah, so I was getting my master's degree back in 2001. Dear God. So long ago. And when I was getting my master's degree, I entered my MSW program thinking I was going to be a play therapist because I had been a preschool teacher and I wanted to work with kids. And I took my first policy class from a woman named Dr. Emma Gross at the University of Utah. And I was like, what is this policy? I was hooked. At the same time, I was doing the very first research in Utah for my research methods class about homeless LGBTQ plus youth in Utah. And I asked Dr. Gross and also my research professor, Dr. Karen Frost, who both became mentors to me eventually, if there were any jobs in policy. And I remember Dr. Gross saying, you're going to have to move to DC to do that. And what happened was that I did that research on homeless youth. And our law said you couldn't shelter a youth for longer than 8 hours without parental consent or emancipation. And I'd worked long enough in child welfare to know that we didn't actually have an emancipation law on the books. And so this is pre-Google. And so using Bruce Jansen's model in one of my policy books, I wrote the Emancipation of a Minor bill on my dining room table. I called the Child Welfare League of America and figured out what states had emancipation statutes, went line by line in all those statutes and picked the ones I thought would fit for Utah. And I knew a legislator and I called her and I said, I think I just wrote a bill. Will you sponsor it? And she's like, that's not how this works. And I said, well, I'm going to get it to you anyway. So I printed it and took it to her. Maybe I emailed it to her. I don't know. This is like Yahoo days, right? But anyway, she called me back and she said, you wrote a bill and now you got to learn how it becomes a law. And so I taught myself how a bill becomes a law and passed it into law a couple years later. And that was my foray. I mean, like I was literally sitting at my dining room table writing this bill. And what happened from that was that I developed so many relationships in the Utah legislature that eventually I got hired by Planned Parenthood to be their chief lobbyist for the federal and state level for the state of Utah. And that led into me coming to USC to get my PhD and do research on how women navigate religious stigma to get abortion and contraception in rural California. So, and my dissertation, of course, was built on this framework of macro practice, right? And one of the things I learned from this whole trajectory, and now, of course, I'm running for Congress in the Democratic primary here in Oregon's 4th Congressional District. But one of the things that I've learned across this trajectory is how accessible policymaking is for people. If you have an idea that's going to change the world, you can take it to your elected officials because that's actually democracy in action. And it was a great honor to actually work with Dr. Bruce Jansen while I was at USC. Like the whole thing culminated on itself. And I think that, being able to work with Sam and the work that I did with our policy classes at SC, like I want people to know how accessible policy making is, that it's for all of us.
I could just highlight that, what Melissa was saying. That's one of the biggest things in my graduate level policy classes is to destigmatize and de-fear students' understanding of the word lobbying or running for office or making an impact. It's almost a psychological hurdle rather than a real life hurdle. And once you, like Melissa was just sharing, and I've noticed it for decades now, once one has a little bit of experience practicing their professional voice, I'm not saying it becomes addictive like it did to Melissa, but it becomes a part of your longer career that you no longer have that same hesitancy before your eyes were opened about how easy it is to be a part of things, policy-wise.
Wow. I know this is just audio only, but I'm just like snapping and so excited because this is literally what I hear from many of our students who say, I don't know anything about macro social, or I don't know anything about policy. What do you mean? And so I love your stories, and Melissa, how you just said that it just kind of stumbled upon you. You were inspired by, a really powerful professor that made you kind of see the light, which where you are today. Yeah, Sam, please.
I'd like to ask Melissa a question, actually. It sounds like you came to the social work table already interested in bigger picture issues. But my specific question is, do you remember how it felt when you were first sort of learning clinical related professional social work? Was it a huge switch for you to transition from clinical minded, I know this is like forever ago, to more of a policy focus? Do you remember that sort of transition?
Well, I think yes, and thanks for the question. I think the switch was all of a sudden I realized that with this degree, I could impact so many more people than just doing group work or one-on-one clinical work. And I thought, my God, if I can write these bills that are going to help, like for years, I got updates about how many kids we'd gotten emancipated and gotten services. And it's got to be in the thousands now for sure. But like realizing that through all of these pieces of legislation that I've passed, I'm not just impacting a small number of people, I'm impacting a large number of people. And it has been such an honor and a privilege to teach social work students that, they're coming to me when I was teaching social justice and advocacy classes. When I was talking to them, they'd be frustrated about their clinical work. And I'd be like, well, did you know that's actually related to policy? And here's how. And so all of a sudden, we're creating these. I think if we didn't call it macro, it would help destigmatize it for people because it feels so big when we call it that. But when we help social workers and also other advocates in the community recognize that when we ask a community what it needs, instead of assuming what they need, all of a sudden we're able to create policies that are created by the community in a relational aspect. And so the switch wasn't hard because I want to impact as many people as possible throughout my
Yeah.
lifetime. And that's what policy gave me.
Excellent. Wow. Which is, so transformative in our lives, which really leads me to this next question, too, that I want to give both an opportunity to answer if you want. But I'll start with Sam. If you can explain what it means, you started to already talk about it, but what it means by policy practice, informing policy within the social work practice. And two, how does this translate to your teaching and preparing students to take a deeper dive to affect social change?
Well, as Melissa just was sharing, clinical social workers, their jobs and the structure of their work and how they help is all dictated by policy, funding, bigger picture issues that she was just sharing. And once that connection is made, a clinical social worker, an LCSW, someone who focuses on therapy or groups or working with school children in elementary schools, etc., one becomes more aware of how, like, the organization they work with makes decisions that impact their caseload, for example, how bigger funding streams fund programs and implementation strategies that are more effective or not. So it actually is more seamless than the words micro, meso, macro indicate. So I also want to reinforce what Melissa said there too. I mean, the way we talk about these issues sort of makes it a little further away. And that's how the foundation policy courses, which I lead for our school, are sort of structured, is to introduce grad students seeking their Masters of Social Work in order to first see the bigger picture like that. Second, practice having a professional voice on these issues because not everybody's a born advocate who's loud and talking all the time. So it's a practice. And then everybody practices either publicly testifying at a public forum or lobbying. And that's a first year class. And to conclude, that little bit is enough to open the door that even full-time LCSW social workers 10 years into their career are motivated to spend about 5% of their career working on issues they care about like this, whether it's volunteering. I don't want to just say go to marches or whatever, but having that part of their brain more open. So that's how I try to frame it and get it across.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sam. Melissa, would you care to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that just is so profound to me about the social work profession as a whole is how uniquely suited we are to engage in policy advocacy because of the work we're doing in communities with people. And I think we also have an innate ability to approach people from where they're at, not where we want them to be. And that makes us an extremely effective advocate, right? Like when I approach, even as I'm approaching my campaign, right? Like I'm going out and talking to voters, and all my social work skills are coming into play, right? I'm listening to people, I'm hearing what they have to say, I'm thinking creatively of policy issues that we can use to address this. And so the issues that are coming up for voters. And I think that social workers are so uniquely suited to listening to people and also being really creative and thinking about how can we develop supports for people. And there has never been a more critical time in this country in our lived history, I think, since World War II, for social workers to be deeply engaged, not just in protest, not just in engaging with our communities in whatever ways we're called to do, but to really be thinking critically about how the people that we are interacting with are being deeply affected by the decisions made at a federal level, because what's happening at the federal level is so impacting our school boards, our cities, our county, our states. Like it goes all throughout the system. And I think that if social workers and other advocacy folks that work in social services would just remember that we are so uniquely suited to do this work because we are trained to approach people where they are at.
And I just want to highlight that also, Melissa. That's fantastic. A unique aspect of professional social work is a person and environment orientation. And you know what? The longer I do this, it's been forever now, that's a life skill. That's not just a social work tool. And all other professions should have that. we're very used to, and especially as Melissa was implying, the last many years of our federal government, we're used to a sort of command and control model of governance, at least trying to govern like that, apparently, where decision makers parachute in with their checklist and their commands. And that's the polar opposite of the entire basis of the social work profession, where we start with the person. And so it's an incredibly powerful tool, both professionally, but also in each of our lives.
Excellent. And I can't stress enough the importance of the listening, those skills, the reflective listening, right? And knowing what our constituents, what society is needing. And so, which leads me to wanting to understand. I know, Melissa, you're running for office. And what are you hearing on the campaign trails? What are people asking for or needing? And what's been your strategy?
Well, I think that it's changed. I announced I was running on July 1st, and so I really started calling voters in August. And what they were worried about in August has completely transformed now that we're here in January. And there is a consistent through line about housing, about education, and about healthcare. That's a consistent through line. But it was people really worried about reproductive justice issues, people really concerned about the economy and how things were impacting them a little bit. And then we moved into the issue of taking, stopping SNAP benefits. We moved into the government shutdown. And all of a sudden, people became really worried about food access, right? And how our kids are going to be eating at school. And then now people are 100% concerned about ICE and what's happening with ICE and immigration and the attacks on people's bodily autonomy in that way. But one of the things that I am recognizing, and this is where I just think it's so powerful, the social work training that we have, is that Sam, I'm so glad you brought up this sort of top-down approach to governance. And I have this great idea as a congressperson, and so I'm going to tell the community what I'm going to do. What I am noticing as I'm talking to people is I'm going in and saying, well, what do you need? Because this is a very rural district. This is not, there's two cities here, Eugene and Corvallis, but most of this district is rural. And so I'm going in and asking people in rural areas, what do you need? And they're like, nobody has ever asked us this question. First of all, nobody has ever come here, but nobody's also asked me the question. And so people are really responding to this idea of, well, what do you all need on the coast? Because what you need on the coast is not what we need in Corvallis or Eugene. And so this is what I really urge people to do, is really start to think about asking your community what it needs. Instead of assuming what people need, which is very much how we do grant making and policy work from this top down approach. We are being called to get back into community with each other and be in relationship with each other so we can really identify how, like, this is why I think mutual aid is becoming such a powerful force, because that we're really connecting with people on the ground. And one more thing I want to add is that we need more people in elected office who actually understand the programs that they are cutting right now. So my family is on Medicaid. We have been on food stamps. I'm married to a disabled veteran. My kids are still in public school. I have a daughter that's saddled with student loan debt. Like, we need people particularly in Congress, who actually understand that the actions that are being taken at a federal level impact our families so deeply. And I think that if we could get more social workers just engaged in this process, first of all, they'd realize how accessible our elected officials are, because they are accessible. Even at the highest level of government, they're accessible. And that is a switch that has flipped for me since I started my career 25 years ago, is that I used to tell people to really keep things local. And, the federal government's going to federal government. And now I'm realizing how deeply we need to be involved at all the different levels of government.
Excellent. Oh my gosh, Melissa, you hit on so many different important points. One, obviously, is the unintended consequences that people are when they vote or not vote, all the different policies that get impacted, and that equals to lives being impacted. And I appreciate the re-emphasis about listening and how important that is, to listen to your constituents about what they need and not assume. So, which is kind of a social work trait that we always say, start where your clients are, right? I hear it so often about, voting oh, why should I vote? It doesn't matter. And so trying to reinstill that yes, your vote does matter. So I know we have so much to cover here, and I really also want to just kind of ask right now. It seems kind of obvious, but I'm just going to put it out there for our listeners. And I'll start with Sam, if you don't mind. What do you feel like are the most critical legislative changes over the past year, and what are the potential long-term consequences?
Very good. I guess I have a two-tier response. Response number one about sort of the most concerning aspects of policy right now. The first thing, and we sort of have been talking about it less overtly today, is that the tone of the federal government is this tone that really creates disengagement a trillion miles away. Like how ICE is conducting itself as a professional force that has, an important role, but the way that they're doing their role is so offensive. And the way the federal government currently performatively doing things really turns people off. I don't know if it's part of the strategy or what have you. And so I think longer term, especially with our students or who are already a little bit, they don't come to school necessarily to get more engaged with policy. Like I said, it's got a little mental hump to get over. But once you're over, like Melissa's demonstrating with her career and life, you're in. But like it becomes even harder to approach it because of the tone. That's part one. And then part two, and again, Melissa's really setting the stage for all my answers here. The big, beautiful, bogus bill does substantial harm to America's safety net programs. The SNAP budget, which is food stamps, which 42 million people in America use, moving forward, the federal budget's cut by a third, and the federal government's mandating work requirements to get any kind of food assistance. And the same thing is going on in Medicaid. Medicaid is a humongous insurance program. I know, Melissa, you're in Oregon and in California, 15 million Californians see doctors via their Medicaid insurance, and requiring work requirements across the country and making it harder to access, and the wait times are already really long. Those things are going to further chip away at our meager safety net program. And so I think substantively, those are the things that I'm highlighting right now as particularly bad.
Thank you, Sam. Would you care to add,
Oh, I
Melissa?
sure would.
Go get
So
them.
SNAP is a great example because when we think about policy, this isn't just about those people that rely on the SNAP benefit itself. The way we decide and determine whether or not a school district gets free school breakfast and lunch is determined by the number of children who are receiving SNAP benefits. So if you cut SNAP, you also cut free breakfast and lunch for children in public school. And I think that's part of the process. So my social worker brain kicks in and I start to thread the needle and weave the connections because that's what we're trained to do. And I'm over here going in and testifying at the school board meeting that this isn't just about the actual food stamp benefit. This is actually about making sure that children don't have access to food during the day, which makes it more difficult for them to learn, which makes them more malleable to the rhetoric that is being spread across the country, right? And but that's not overwhelming to me. That's actually clarifying. And the other thing I will say is it is not as if, I mean, we have Project 2026 now. It's not as if they have not laid out the entire playbook for what's going to happen. And one of my frustrations has been that there has been no coordinated response, particularly from the Democratic Party, to what they are laying out in this blueprint that you can literally follow. And the social worker in me is going, y'all, like, come up with a solution. They're going to say this, they're going to do this. How are we going to fight back against it as a unified front? And I think that is what is missing. And I really, truly believe that, yes, it feels like we are drinking out of a violent, chaotic fire hose every single day. And also, things are cracking in this democracy. I spoke at a vigil for democracy the other night, and I said, it's okay for this democracy in its current form to be showing us for the light to be breaking in where it does not work, because any democracy built on slavery and genocide is not a democracy of the people, by the people, for the people. If we want a democracy for all of the people, then we have to start to notice where the cracks are in the democracy and allow it to crumble a little bit. I'm not suggesting it should go away, but so that we can figure out how to rise up collectively and say, this is the actual government that we want. We want those separation of powers. We want to be engaged with our elected officials. And we want a democracy that is actually representative of everybody.
Amen. Melissa, you've got my vote. Oh my gosh, I'm with you. I'm with you. This discussion is so incredible. I know there's a few other questions I want to make sure we get to for our listeners, but I know we have a graduate certificate program that I want to make sure that Sam talks a little bit about. So, Sam, can you just share with us about this 2 graduate certificate courses so that our listeners know a little bit more about this? And then we're going to start to wrap up in just a moment.
For our listeners who don't know, the USC School of Social Work, in addition to when you seek to earn your Master's of Social Work, we also offer 12 or 15 different, like more intense areas of study across all kinds of different modalities. And so we have 2 joint certificates between the School of Social Work and the Gould School of Law at USC. And one focuses on administration of social agencies, and the other focuses on more sort of clinical orientation. To just sort of be clear, law students also take this, and they take social work classes like the only ones that they've ever taken. In addition to our social work students have an ability to take law classes. And it's really very interesting. I've had in my time here a couple different people got joint degrees, MSW, JD, which is very powerful combination. So it's always very exciting when I talk with social work students explaining what they could expect on, and they have some, they could choose the law classes they take. And it's really interesting to see a different sort of orientation towards society, because to conclude, law has a totally different orientation towards society than social work does. I know them both, and I have to share, I prefer the social work orientation. That's why I've been here for so long. But having a little bit of a foot inside the legal thinking is helpful to your skill set.
Excellent. Thank you, Sam, for sharing. And again, I'm so sorry we're running out of time, but this is such a rich conversation. So maybe what we can do is just add, if there's anything, and I'll give maybe Sam first and then Melissa to bring us home, is if there's anything else that you would like to share for our listeners that we didn't ask about social work and informing policy, what would you add? Sam, we'll start with you, and then Melissa, you can bring us home.
Well, my ending thing would be make an argument for working on issues you care about personally is a form of self-care. Voting, when you do it regularly, whether you think your vote makes a difference or not, it's a form of self-care. You're self-caring your position in society as a person whose career it is to make things better. And I would like to conclude in that you do a little bit of policy work throughout your career, not running for office and making your entire career, but partially and portion of your career, and it's a form of self-care. You'll feel better in the long term about your role here in America.
Excellent. Thank you, Sam. And Melissa.
I want to say that I think voting is a form of soul care, because
Love that.
what
Oh my gosh.
we are craving is this connection to self in a way that we think we are making an impact in the world. And I have heard from thousands of voters who are so frustrated with this 2-party system that they've left the parties. And what I want to remind people is that often the primaries are closed primaries, which is another barrier to engaging in democracy. And so if you are looking at candidates who are inspiring you, if you want to see more progressive candidates, remember to pay attention to your voter registration. Because for people to be able to vote for me in the May 19th primary here in Oregon, they have to be a registered Democrat. And people are telling me they are changing their voter registration to vote for me, which I honor. Like, it makes me weep. I have cried numerous times with people because they have given me that honor. That is sacred. Voting is sacred. And I have voted in every election since I turned 18, no matter what the election was. So I just really want people to leave this conversation inspired. And what Sam said is so important. What lights you on fire, what makes you feel passionate, that thing that gives you the chills when you think about it, go and follow it, because that is how my career has been made for sure. And follow the thread. Like if it totally lights you up, there are ways that you can make a difference. And I am happy to mentor anybody who wants to go and do. I've said this my whole career. If you want someone to talk to or you have a question, I am totally accessible to people. And I just really want people to be just guided by the thing that gives them the chills and makes them feel passionate, because that we can't save the whole world. We can't make a difference with all of the things, but the thing that is most immediate to you is the thing that you go and do.
I have the chills and I am ready to go out and vote. Let's do it, right? Thank you so very much. I just really taking away, that public policy equals soul care, right? Oh my gosh, that sounds like a t-shirt. We need to put that on a t-shirt, right? But anyway, I just want to say thank you, thank you, Sam and Melissa, for joining us for this incredible discussion. I do believe at some point we're going to need to bring you both back as the world turns, right? If you would like more information about our work on public policy, please visit our website at dworak-peck.usc.edu. If you are interested in our graduate certificates in law and advocacy or social work administration that Sam teaches, please visit dworak-peck.usc.edu/graduate certificates. And you can learn more about Melissa's campaign for Congress at melissabirdforcongress.com. And if you would like to network with our guests regarding their work and want to support our transformative research and programs, please email us at Listen.Up.People@usc.edu. Thank you.